Hello everyone, welcome once again to Midweek Encouragement. Great to have you along this evening for this journey we're on. I am Ronald Rice, your host for tonight, and looking forward to a great time. We're starting a new series tonight. The new series is called Open, and we're going to have a great time here. So I want you to follow along as we go, and make sure that you're making comments down below there in the right places, that you're asking any questions that you may have of me. Be glad to answer. I love questions. If you would share the video, start a watch party, whatever the platform, whether it's YouTube or Facebook, however that may work for you, do that if you would, so we can try to work on those algorithms and get things going and out into the public more and more. We just want to share Jesus with everybody that wants to hear about Him. But thank you for coming tonight, and we're going to have a great time. I hope you have your Bibles ready. We're going to Mark chapter 8, and we're going to start at verse 11. So get your Bibles, get your notepad or note-taking device, whatever that may be, and let's jump right in here and start with our new series, Open. Avoid the pervasive spirit of criticism and unbelief. Mark 8, 11 through 17. Mark 8, 11 through 17. I want you to read along with me here. Then the Pharisees came out and began to dispute with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven, testing him. But he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Assuredly, I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation." And he left them, and getting into the boat again, departed to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, and they did not have more than one loaf with them in the boat. Then he charged them, saying, "Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "It is because we have no bread." But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, "Why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened?" See, we left off last time with the religious elites from Jerusalem. They had come to him, and we Matthew uses the word testing as well. They're testing Jesus, and they're doing it just like the devil tested Jesus in the wilderness. Sometimes, to put this delicately, sometimes religious people do the work of the devil. Thank the Lord for religious people, right? Some people call them grace builders, but truthfully, it's the testing of our faith that often makes us what the Lord wants us to be and to become. You're not going to enter the kingdom of God without trials and tribulations. So don't grumble and complain about the hypocrite. Don't complain about the person that's rude or perhaps insensitive. Maybe thank God that He has a way to get you where you need to be. And sometimes it's those people, and it's just the way it works. God has purpose in everything. There's always purpose, even when we don't see it, even when we don't know it, even when we don't realize it. There's always purpose. So what happens? Jesus sighs deeply in his spirit, and he laments that his generation is seeking a sign, and promptly proclaimed, well, in a different gospel, other than where we're reading now, that the only sign they were going to get was the sign of Jonah. These people are looking for a sign. Perhaps they wanted a sign in the heavens. Maybe it seems that they were unwilling to accept the compassion that had been shown on earth as a sign. They wanted to see something more spectacular. Somehow the blind seeing and the deaf hearing and the lame walking and the lepers cleansed and the demons cast out, the dead coming to life again. I don't know, somehow none of that was enough of a sign for these folks who are questioning him and testing him. Now they needed something more. And really that's what religious pride will do to you. Understand, there's nothing inherently wrong with religion. But there is certainly a problem with religious pride. And these people were simply, again, demanding that Jesus do what they wanted him to do. And the kingdom doesn't work like that. It just doesn't. And I read that tonight to get to the context for what is happening here in verse 13. So we kind of overlapped a little bit where we left off last week and kind of reestablishing our context. Jesus and the disciples get in the boat, and it literally says again, and head to the other side. I'm not altogether sure where the other side is this time. But at any rate, they're crossing the lake and they're in the boat, which means they're away from the people again. And while they're there, the disciples realize they forgot to bring any extra bread with them. And they're discussing it. They're reasoning about it. They got to looking and realized they only had one loaf of bread, which apparently is not enough for, 13 people at least, if not more. Now surely by now they know better than this, right? There's nowhere to stop along the way in the lake to go get something to eat. There's no shoreside restaurants. There's no place in the middle of the lake, certainly, to go get something to eat. So they know they should have packed a little lunch and planned ahead when they were going to get in the boat. But they didn't, even though they knew better, especially the disciples who were fishermen and knew about all of this. So the disciples are having this conversation. They left and they didn't bring enough food. I don't know how your imagination is, but mine is like, I thought you brought it. Well, I thought you brought it. Well, didn't you stop and get something? No, I didn't. I thought you were going to get something. Well, what about, I don't know how it went exactly, but they were having a conversation, right? And their conversation had to do with not having enough bread for the journey that they were taking. So while this conversation is happening, Jesus speaks up from, across the boat somewhere and says, hey guys, I want you to take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Now, when Matthew recorded this moment, Jesus said, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of the Sadducees. So he says leaven, they think bread. The disciples immediately thought Jesus was talking about the fact that they didn't have enough bread or had really no bread for everybody. No, I'm not sure how they weren't sure how the Pharisees and the Sadducees and Herod all fit into all of this. But it's recorded that that's kind of what they were thinking. Bread, leaven, bread. The Pharisees, again, a little more context. The Pharisees were the conservative party of the Jewish religion. Maybe that would help in some understanding with a Western mind. The Sadducees were the liberal branch of the the Jewish religious structure. The Sadducees were the current controlling party of the temple. And Herod, the other one mentioned here, was the current Jewish political power. So what is Jesus trying to tell them? Jesus is warning them about spiritual things, and all they can think about is natural things. And perceiving this, Jesus says, why? Why? Don't you get it yet? Didn't we just feed 4,000 men plus everybody else? Are your hearts still hardened? So let's look at this for a moment. If you can't perceive spiritual things, it's because of a heart issue. If you're unable to understand, it's not because God is not revealing things to you. It's not because the Bible you have is somehow the wrong translation. No, it's because your heart has to be soft toward the things of God in order for God to speak to you. Hard hearts can't see. They can't hear either. They can't speak. Proud hearts can only speak. I mean, they can speak, but they can't edify. They can't build up. They can't bring life in that way. A hard heart cannot bring any kind of revelation, because what you can't hear, you can't say. Remember the guy we recently read about in the Gospels who was both deaf and mute? And Jesus healed his hearing, and then he healed his speaking, in that order. So once you can hear Jesus, then you have something to say about him. Now, hypocrisy is giving out something when you're not getting anything. It's being the actor. It's pretending. Giving out something as if you're getting something, but you're not really getting anything. There has to be something flowing through us in order for there to be some sort of revelation. That flow comes from having a genuine relationship with God. You know, pride is kind of like bad breath, right? You don't really notice it unless it comes from somebody else. If it's somebody else's, then you notice it right away. If you have it, you don't really notice it. Listen, never turn down a breath mint. If anybody ever offers you a breath mint, always take it. Just file that away somewhere. So Jesus could have been saying these things to the Pharisees and Sadducees, and they would have agreed with him. Absolutely, pride is bad. Pride, you shouldn't have pride. But did they have it? Absolutely they had it. But they couldn't see it because they were the ones with it. So the conservative Pharisees were proud because they had better rules, which made them better people, of course. Everybody knows that, right? Well, the liberal Sadducees were proud because the rules really didn't apply to them. They were for everybody else. And they were just going to do things their way anyway. Didn't matter what anybody else said. And then you got Herod. Herod is all about control, self-ambition, and just plain egotistical selfishness. Just old-fashioned pride in self. And after this encounter with the religious elites, Jesus is trying to warn his disciples about these things that he's been dealing with one-on-one or between himself and those groups that had come to test him. He's telling them to be careful and be aware that these things are going on. Got it? Got it. Let's move on. We're going to go to verses 18 to 21 of Mark chapter 8. Only when God opens our eyes can we see Him. This is fun. Please follow along with me here. If you have your Bible, I'm reading from the New King James Version in this particular time. This is Mark 8, 18 through 21. 18 through 21. Not too long. Here we go. Having eyes, do you not see? And remember, he just said, is your heart still hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said to him, 12. Also, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said, 7. So he said to them, how is it you do not understand? Maybe I read too much into some of this. I don't know. But let me ask you, are your eyes open? Do you have eyes but do not see? Lord, help us. Open all our eyes today. Help us see. You see, even if you are a disciple, you might still need to have your eyes opened. Remember, this is the core group he was talking to. Are your ears open? Do you have ears but do not hear? You might have heard from God. You might have heard Him as you were reading His Word. It might have been corrective instruction, or maybe it was direction for how you should live. And I pray that you have heard. But notice that Jesus asks afterwards, do you have eyes and not see, ears and not hear, and do you not remember? See, you may have seen with your spiritual eyes and heard the Lord speak to you, but are you retaining what you're learning? Are you keeping that filed away? Is it meaningful enough for you to grab hold of it and remember it? Are you retaining where He is taking you? And this is the great reason, I think, that we ought to regularly read through the Bible on a regular basis. Have a reading plan. Why? Because it helps stir your mind to remember those things. As you read, see, you remember some things about what God has spoken to you in the past. So, I don't know how it is with you, and I'm reading through, and all of a sudden, I'm brought back to that moment that He spoke to me through that passage at some point, and it reminds me and it reaffirms His love for me, His care for me, and His plan for me sometimes. So here, with these disciples, they saw amazing miracles. And so Jesus is not only asking if they remember them, He's reminding them of these things. Do you remember the 5 loaves that fed the 5,000 and all the women and children? How many baskets of leftovers did you get? And I don't know, in my mind, I can hear a sheepish answer from somebody among the 12, and they said, 12. So we know the core 12 disciples were there in that boat at that time, because they were the ones that were there when they picked up 12 baskets of leftovers. And then He says, do you remember the 7 loaves that fed the 4,000? How many large baskets of leftovers did you pick up? And maybe another group that He had been training and working on sheepishly, somebody in that group said, 7. So you do remember. You remember, but did you see? You thought it was about feeding physical hungry people. You thought it was about satiating their hunger. See, perhaps we can learn from this and see that everything that God does should be teaching us something. If we get that, if we understand that God does everything with purpose and reason, maybe we can start to see some of these things differently. You start seeing what happens in your life on a regular basis, all of it, from a little different perspective, if you remember that God is trying to teach us something. And you might also see things that happen in the Bible differently. These things are not coincidental. They're not accidental. They're not happenstance. They didn't just happen to be coming across these things, and these things didn't just show up and be. No. There are no coincidences with God. He does everything with purpose. So they remembered. They remembered. But Jesus says, how is it that you don't understand? You may or may not remember it, but there was a day when you suddenly realized that you have a shadow. I don't know when that day was in my life. Some people remember the moment. They walk outside on a sunny day and say, oh, look, what is that? It moves when I move. It's always been there. You just really didn't pay attention to it. You had it all along. And maybe that's how the disciples are right here. These things are happening all around them with some frequency. But are they really seeing what's happening? Or are they just caught up in the moment and not catching what's going on around them? They see them, of course, on one level. But Jesus is asking, how is it you cannot see that there's something bigger here than just feeding hungry people? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees and of Herod. See, these don't have spiritual perception. Now, you can justify yourself and say that you are not way on one side or the other, and you're not over here and you're not over there, and you're certainly not like Herod. You can do those things. But where is it that we're supposed to be? Are we supposed to be somewhere in the middle of all of these human interactions? Or are we supposed to be somewhere completely different? Let's try it this way. What if I were to say, beware of the cancer of the conservatives, and beware of the cancer of the liberals, and beware of the cancer of the powerful, those with wealth and control, wanting status and some significance in life? See, it's a cancer. Now, we kind of understand cancer, right? Leaven gets into something and eventually spreads throughout the entire dough, making it rise to some extent. But it goes through the whole thing. It just spreads. It multiplies within. Cancer does much the same thing. We don't want cancer. We don't like cancer. We don't want something harmful that we often don't even realize is there. In some cases, by the time you notice a tumor, it may have been there for 20 years. How long does pride need to be resident before you notice its misshapen evidence? It's something that grows silently, and it's a risk that we all run. Nobody has immunity against it. We justify ourselves and we compare ourselves to others, basically saying, well, I'm not like that one, and I'm not like her, and I'm not like him, or whomever. So, if I am not controlled by rules, and I'm not controlled by rebellion, and I'm not controlled by the desire for manipulating people, well, hey, I must be good. We got this, right? Or maybe we've just created a whole new category of pride. Listen carefully. Beware of pride. It will destroy you. Maybe Jesus threw all these categories of people together because they are representative of different ways that pride impacts people. When you're proud, you can't see. You're blinded. Pride will blind you to God, and all we then see is ourselves, and because of that, we can't understand what we need to understand. Look, watch what happens next. Let's keep reading. Matthew 8 still, verses 22 through, did I say Matthew? Mark 8, verses 22 through 26. Mark 8, 22 through 26. Go ahead and read. This is the next little segment. This is interesting. Watch. Then he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes, and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. Then he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up. And he was restored and saw everyone clearly. And he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town nor tell anyone in the town. Sounds like a familiar theme, doesn't it? So at some point in this journey, they end up in Bethsaida again. And while they're in Bethsaida, the people bring him a blind man. Bethsaida, again, for context, is on the northern end of the Sea of Galilee, northeastern part. So they're over there, and somebody brings a blind man. I love the way the author is telling this story and then illustrating what he wants for us to understand. A blind man's brought to Jesus, and they're begging him to touch him. Now I want you to pay attention that this is the same wording as when Jesus was presented the guy who was both deaf and mute. They brought him to Jesus and begged Jesus to help this man. And Jesus does essentially the same thing he did with the deaf and the mute man. Remember, he spit and he touched his tongue. He's God in flesh. He do what he wants. If he wants to spit on me, that'd be fine with me too. But the whole thing it's cringe. It makes me cringe. Okay, so he did that with the deaf and mute man. Now he's taking this blind man. He's leading him out of town, away from all the crowd. See, sometimes God has you do things that are not for the crowd to see. It's not for the crowd. It's personal. It's private. Jesus he's going to minister to this blind man, and he's going to do it discreetly. Took him away so nobody could see. Previously, remember, Jesus spit and touched the man's tongue and he spoke. We got all that. Here, Jesus spits on the man's eyes and then puts his hands on him. I don't know the significance of the spit. I really don't. And I struggle with this a little bit, I confess. But the record here is that Jesus spit in the man's face. In his eyes. I mean, sanitize this any way you want. Explain it away any way you want to. But that's what happened. Well, I have completely run out of time. And we'll just have to pick this up next week and keep working on all of these things. Thank you for joining in tonight and walking this journey with me. It's amazing. It's fun. I hope it's enlightening. to each of you, and I hope you're continuing to learn and grow and become everything Jesus wants you to be. So until next Wednesday, when we pick this up again at 7:30 next Wednesday evening for Midweek Encouragement, I'm encouraging you once again to love God first and foremost. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love people. Fast, pray, give generously. And now you go and make a disciple.